It's been really nice to be here for the past day or so, learning more about longevity and health. Today, and in this talk, I'm going to focus a little bit more in on one aspect of this, and that is women's health and reproductive health. So really trying to understand how does reproductive health in women shape broader health, how does broader health shape women's reproductive health, really along the woman's life. So as a quick sort of introduction, why women's health? Why are we saying women's health specifically? So we know women make up half of the population globally and also in India. You can see the global sort of population pyramids here and for India as well. They're important contributors to society, to national economic productivity, to families, etc. But they're not exactly the same as men, right? So women are biologically distinct from men, which means that they have distinct biological risks that will be affecting their health into older age. They also have distinct social, cultural, and economic risks as well to health. And so you can't really look at women with the same lens as you look at men with. Despite this, of course, as we know, health research in women has generally been quite historically limited. So previously, when we looked at population health research in women, generally women were first just not included in studies, including trials of drugs, etc. When women started being included, and this is up until now as well in epidemiological research, we often don't disaggregate the data, look at sort of women-specific trends and associations and see whether they're different. And currently, and quite importantly, there's a large global focus on pregnancy-related measures, which is very important because there is sort of a substantial burden of maternal and infant mortality, and we need to think about interventions in pregnancy to kind of reduce that. But remember that this is really only 9 or so months of somebody's life, maybe 2 or 3 or 4 times in their life, and that life is going to go on for many, many different years, right? So importantly, alongside this, there's very, very limited understanding of reproductive system and the reproductive health of women and reproductive disorders, especially. And we know very little about how this actually shapes and is shaped by broader health and really across the life course. So we're not talking about just any single time point. We're going from adolescence and reproductive age, episodes of pregnancy, all the way into perimenopause and older adulthood. So essentially, we really kind of need to look at this. So in this talk, I'll just focus in on a few sort of key areas and phases and what we know, especially within the context of LMIC, so lower and middle income countries and lower resource settings, including India, to kind of begin to kind of uncover where these associations are, why is this important. So starting first with reproductive health and health outcomes outside of pregnancy. So how does the reproductive system and reproductive health actually affect health when we're not even looking at pregnancy, just outside of it? I can do this. There we go. So great. So essentially, a key example of this we can take, for example, is anemia. So we all know anemia, so low hemoglobin levels are an important contributor to morbidity and mortality. This includes in women across the globe, including in India. It's disproportionately kind of concentrated, the burden of anemia is concentrated among women of reproductive age. It has consequences across multiple different domains, starting with cognition, really adverse pregnancy outcomes, reduced productivity, infections, etc. And it's been quite an intractable problem to kind of solve, right? We still have a high burden of anemia, including in settings such as India. So you can see on the map over here, but also sub-Saharan Africa, etc. And so we look a lot at nutritional causes of anemia. We talk a lot about iron folic acid supplementation, and that's really been the focus of many programs globally and in India. But now people are beginning to think about non-nutritional causes as well, such as infections. But a really overlooked aspect of this is menstrual bleeding in women and heavy menstrual bleeding. So as we know, with menstrual blood loss, there's an increased risk of anemia. But essentially, menstrual bleeding has been quite difficult to quantify. It's not very easy to objectively kind of measure something like this. And when something is not measured for in public health and quantified and examined, it's essentially not accounted for in programs as well. So we can't quite look at essentially menstrual bleeding and anemia and quantify it at the population level perhaps, but we can look at other sort of measures that affect menstrual bleeding and see what is kind of the relationship with that and the anemia risk. And essentially, one way to look at this and work that we did previously, this is based in low and middle income countries, including India. I'll present some Africa data as well, but also data that includes Indian populations, was part of a project that looked at family planning and nutrition. What are the biological linkages between these and epidemiological and programmatic linkages between these in women of reproductive age globally? And essentially what we looked at was data from There we go. Data from 2 countries in East and West Africa, essentially asking how is contraceptive use associated with anemia. So we know at least for hormonal contraceptives, they often reduce menstrual bleeding or may pause it. And does that actually have some sort of impact on anemia? So we took data from nationally representative demographic and health surveys in both Tanzania and Burkina Faso, so that's East Africa and West Africa, covering about 10,000 plus women in each country. And basically we're looking at what is the relationship between hormonal or non-hormonal contraceptive use and anemia risk. And essentially what we see is for hormonal contraceptives, there's a reduced risk, if the pointer works. But even if it doesn't work, essentially you can see the yellow squares over here. We're seeing hormonal contraceptives over here. And essentially with the use of these ones in the squares, in Tanzania, there's about 28 to 38% reduced risk with contraceptives such as the pill or injections. And in Burkina Faso, it's about 12 to 28% reduced risk. When we look at non-hormonal contraceptives, you don't see the same trend. So essentially, you don't really see much of an effect on anemia status. We also kind of looked at other trials and other studies that kind of look at hormonal versus non-hormonal contraceptive use, and both trials that we identified after a very large sort of systematic synthesis of the literature also indicated an increase in hemoglobin levels with the use of hormonal contraceptives versus non-hormonal. We also actually do see this a little bit in India-specific literature as well that has been previously published, and also data from many other countries. So here we see some sort of impact on hormonal contraceptives on anemia reduction, essentially. So the idea is not to say, oh, we should all use hormonal contraceptives for anemia reduction. The point over here is that there is something that can be used to potentially modify or reduce menstrual blood loss, which is actually apparently something that is contributing to anemia risk. That we really just haven't thought about at all. And now increasingly people are beginning to recognize that heavy menstrual bleeding and menstrual bleeding is actually a problem in women. In self-reported scales across studies in India, South Asia, and sub-Saharan Africa, we see at least a high self-reported prevalence, which suggests that this is really something we need to look at in order to prevent anemia, but also importantly, improve health and the health risks that are associated with anemia in women. And this is, of course, something that we don't need to think about for men. The other important thing, of course, is to say that this is just one sort of aspect of reproductive health, heavy menstrual bleeding. It may have other underlying causes, and it also has broader consequences on mental and otherwise physical well-being that are really important to address. So it's not just, that, but just to kind of make the point that it has a lot of different effects, including multi-domain, including anemia. So moving on, how does broader health, so we've looked at a little bit of reproductive health and outcomes just outside of pregnancy, so just not even thinking about childbearing, etc. How does broader health actually associate, or what is its relationship with reproductive outcomes, so outcomes potentially related to pregnancy and reproduction? So the idea essentially is, as I mentioned earlier, that a lot of what the studies look at so far just focus in on pregnancy as a state. What can we do in pregnancy to improve pregnancy outcomes? That's basically it. But really there's a little bit more to that. Oftentimes health prior to pregnancy is important, and that's being increasingly recognized, and that includes for things such as reproductive outcomes. So things that are related to someone's physiological capacity to conceive, sustain a pregnancy, and deliver a live-born infant. So that might be measures of fertility or even fetal death, such as miscarriage or stillbirth. So really the question is, we know a little bit about pregnancy and how measures in pregnancy affect reproductive outcomes, but what about health prior to pregnancy? Is that actually important for something like this? So we actually looked at this, and specifically looking at reproductive outcomes such as fertility and fetal death in particular, and kind of tried to understand how do poorer health states, particularly relating to thinness, overweight, and obesity, as a marker of just overall health, and how do they relate to reproductive outcomes? So as part of the Family Planning and Nutrition Project, we conducted a systematic evidence synthesis. So here, basically what we're doing is we're going out and systematically searching the literature for all possible evidence from low and middle income countries that looks at nutrition-related health states and how they might be affecting measures of reproductive potential in women. We found about 180 eligible studies, and they looked at multiple different parameters and included studies from South Asia and India. And we pulled out those that specifically were of interest specifically for reproductive outcomes. And we took their estimates that they reported and statistically sort of combined them to get a more reliable estimate of what are the patterns that we're actually seeing across countries, across studies. So there's a lot of numbers over here, but essentially what I would like to take away from this, or I would like you to take away from this, is that pre-pregnancy health really matters for reproductive outcomes, including those related to fetal survival and also actually related to fertility. So for example, miscarriage and stillbirth, overweight and obesity seem to be really important sort of potential determinants. Let me try the pointer again. It doesn't work, but still. So for example, for obesity, women who have obesity prior to pregnancy have about 66% increased risk of stillbirth during pregnancy. So they're really lasting sort of impacts that don't stop at pregnancy. They actually happen, don't stop at pre-pregnancy, but actually like go into pregnancy. So there are linkages across the life course and different life phases that we really need to think about in women, which of course, again, we don't really need to worry about in men. Also, just to point out, thinness we also found was associated with sort of lower sort of measures of fertility, including implantation rate. Again, sort of emphasizing that there is something that we need to look at even prior to pregnancy states. So that's a little bit about broader health and how it's actually affecting and linking to reproductive outcomes. Now let's move on a little bit further. So we've kind of looked at that. What about pregnancy? And is pregnancy and health in pregnancy just kind of, contained within that particular period? Or is it actually a longer-term determinant of health? So as I mentioned earlier, most of the research so far kind of looks at interventions in pregnancy that we can do in order to improve pregnancy outcomes, such as maternal mortality or infant outcomes such as low birth weight. There's a lot of research, including in India, that really focuses on that. When there are sort of longer-term evaluations of such interventions or health after pregnancy, they often focus on the children, which again is important because infants and young children are at increased risk. They have developmental sort of risks and they're at critical periods over there as well. But there's really very limited sort of work and research kind of looking at longer-term impact on women. What happens after pregnancy? If there are sort of, adverse cardiometabolic or other states during pregnancy, or just even adverse sort of metabolic measures, what happens in their longer term, for their longer term health? And what does that mean for their longevity and health, far later into life? In this case, we focused a little bit more on gestational weight gain in some of the work that I previously did. So that's basically weight gain in pregnancy. There's a lot of, the idea for this essentially is that there are measures that we can simply look at. These are measures that we can easily look at. Gestational weight gain is somewhat modifiable if you have behavioral sort of interventions, and it can be easily monitored as well. So in terms of public health impact, it's actually something really important to look at. And previous research has already actually demonstrated that gestational weight gain is actually an important determinant of child outcomes, such as low birth weight or small for gestational age, which have implications for child survival. But what about women? So we did a very large-scale sort of data pooling effort. So here, basically, what we're doing is we are, again, systematically looking at the literature. What are all of the studies that have followed women throughout pregnancy and taken weight measures? This is in Sub-Saharan Africa, in Latin America, in South Asia, basically trying to get a global view of this issue. And then asked colleagues from there to help us pool data so that we can really reliably and statistically combine these data to understand what is the association or the effect of gestational weight gain in pregnancy on later, longer-term health. So we did a lot of, this is a busy sort of picture over here, but the point is that we did a lot of analyses looking at what might affect gestational weight gain and inform how a woman gains weight during pregnancy, but also what is the impact of gestational weight gain on maternal perinatal complications and health after pregnancy as well. So for that particular analysis, we looked at 61 studies and data from about 150,000 plus women, including many thousands of women in South Asia. And we looked essentially at many different sort of aspects, but if we want to kind of summarize it, what is the effect of inadequate gestational weight gain? So you're not meeting the gestational weight gain or pregnancy weight gain recommendations, you're below them. Or what is the impact of excessive gestational weight gain? So you're kind of going above what is actually recommended to gain in terms of weight in pregnancy. There's a lot of findings here, but I just wanted to highlight the ones that are related to excessive gestational weight gain because I think they have implications for later life health as well. So a lot of numbers again over here again, but if we start with the first sort of row or the two sort of light orange boxes over there, women who had excessive gestational weight gain were more likely to have cesarean delivery and emergency cesarean delivery. So we're already seeing these impacts over here at the end of pregnancy. But if you actually look into longer-term health as well and postpartum cardiovascular and metabolic measures, women who had excessive gestational weight gain essentially gained on average 2 kilograms more than those who had adequate gestational weight gain, at on average about 1 year or so postpartum as well. And they also had a 1 unit higher on average BMI than those who had adequate gestational weight gain. And it seems like a little bit, but actually at a population level, if you think about it, that says a lot in terms of translation into later cardiovascular and metabolic risk. We also actually did observe some increases in waist circumference, so again a measure of adiposity and cardiovascular and metabolic risk, and also systolic and diastolic blood pressure, although these were not necessarily significant, so it's hard to read into it. But the key message kind of still remains, because we do look at adiposity as an important measure of long-term risk and long-term health. So we've kind of looked at all of these different aspects, right? So reproductive health and outcomes outside of pregnancy, how health before pregnancy might affect reproductive outcomes, and then how does pregnancy actually affect longer-term health. The important thing to note, of course, is that these are just small examples of a lot of different things. Outcomes that we talked about, anemia or cardiovascular and metabolic risk, this is a slightly poor representation, but the point is that these are not a single event in time, right? If you have anemia or you are anemic, you may have consequences far later into life. If you have or develop high blood pressure or high BMI, you're more likely to then develop cardiovascular and metabolic diseases. So we're really talking about a life course continuum over here of potentially accumulating risks as well. So we really need to kind of think about all of these interrelated factors and diseases across the life course, uniquely in women, and how they might be affecting long-term health and longevity. The other thing to note is that I only really gave you 3 examples because that's all the time I have. These are really simple examples based on the data we have. But there's a range of different things, and there's emerging evidence from other settings as well that I think is important to look at within the India setting that we need to kind of examine. So for reproductive health and reproductive disorders, we have fibroids, endometriosis, polyendocrine metabolic ovarian syndrome, that might be affecting pregnancy outcomes, gestational diabetes, hypertensive disorders. They may also be affecting long-term cardiovascular and metabolic risk. Conditions during pregnancy themselves, as I mentioned earlier, may be affecting long-term risk, but we haven't really looked at them a whole ton. And really importantly, a big sort of unknown over here that I want to mention is menopause, because there is a huge drop in estrogen levels during the menopause period, and that has consequences and additional consequences on cardiovascular and metabolic risk and also bone health, etc. So that's basically it. I'll pause over here. Hopefully that's a little bit of food for thought in terms of women's health. Sorry I had to run through, but thanks so much once again.